May I now invite Advisor Infrastructure Railway Board, Mr. Girish Pillai, to make a presentation on the 5-year capital investment plan.
Respected Minister for Railways, Chairman Railway Board, Financial Commissioner, Mr. Chauhan of the Bombay Stock Exchange, distinguished past leaders and current senior functionaries of the Bombay Stock Exchange, Chairman LIC, Mr. Patel, Deputy Governor from the Reserve Bank, General Managers of the Railways, my colleagues from the Railways, and the very distinguished participants from the banking industry. It's always a challenge to speak after the Minister has spoken. And as all of you would agree with me, sir, you brought a kind of energy and speed to the Railways in its thinking at least, which is difficult or a challenge for the railwaymen to match. We are trying our best to match the challenge which you have posed before us. Let me, before I get into the presentation, just a few words about the story of the railways for the past 10-12 years to place matters in perspective in the context of what the Honorable Minister said about investment. Over the last 10-12 years, that is from 2002 onwards, the railway freight and passenger, which is the business of the railways, has almost doubled. From a level of around 500 million tons in 2002, it is now over 1100 million tons. Similarly, the passenger traffic from a level of almost 4,500 to 4,600 million passengers, now it had reached 8,400 million passengers. Over this period of 10-12 years, while some infrastructure development and investment took place, there is definitely a need to do much more in the current scenario that we are. During the 10th and 11th plan periods, that is from 2002 till 2012, so the railways are invested about, the overall investment in the railways was about 3,10,000 crores. In the last 2 years, the investment was about 55,000 crores and 60,000 crores. And in the current year, what is planned is 1 lakh crores. The Honorable Minister mentioned that China is investing $120 billion dollars almost every year. It is a fact that they have been investing for the last several years, ranging from 120 billion to 130 billion dollars. And the pace of progress in China has, to a large extent, kept pace with their vision and their dreams of building infrastructure. India, we have invested about 10 billion, say, in the last year, and prior to that, it was $9 billion, $8 billion. In other countries, like, for example, in the US, which is a freight, entirely freight railroad system, which is privately owned, the investment per year has been in the range of around 22 to 25 billion US dollars. In Russia, again, it has undergone a complete transformation with the entire railway system getting segregated, infrastructure being segregated and from operations, and the entire operations being thrown open to the private sector. The investment requirement in the railways, and all of you understand money, so I will just talk for a little while about that. The investment requirement in the railways has been gone into by a lot of people, a lot of expert committees. Sam Pitroda committee in 2012 had assessed a requirement of around 8.5 lakh crores. More recently, the National Transport Policy Committee, NTDPC, had gone into the requirement in the railways for the next 20 years. And they had come up with two scenarios. One, based on the assessment that what all areas should the railways develop in, they had made an assessment, and they had said that the railway should invest 35 lakh crores in the next 20 years. That means around 1.7 lakh crores a year. Another assessment they made was that what should be the percentage of investment vis-a-vis the GDP. Today in India, it is around 0.6%, sir. They made an assessment that we should have an investment of around 1.3%. So if it were to be 1.3% of GDP invested in the railways, Then the requirement as per the very learned and distinguished committee was that the railway should invest over the next 20 years 58 lakh crores. That means around 2.9 lakh crores per year should be invested in the railways. Now what roadmap has been laid out and what has been announced by the Honorable Minister in the budget is 8.5 lakh crores in the next 5 years, which would roughly translate to around 1.6, 1.7 lakh crores, which is a quantum jump over what has been the investment in the past, and largely in keeping with what the various experts have taken almost a year or a year and a half to assess in detail as to what should be the investment in the railways. With that very brief background, let me just get on with the presentation. As the Minister said, we have just come to explain the position about the railways and the investment requirements, so I'll try and speak as quickly as possible without being too fast. We have a network of 66,000 route kilometers, and we run about 13,000 passenger trains and 8,000 freight trains, and we have nearly 13 lakh employees. The city of Bombay, where we are, we run about 2,900 suburban trains. That's around 23-24% of the total number of passenger trains that we operate in India. We transport in Mumbai, or in between Mumbai Western and Mumbai Central, almost 35%, sir, of the passengers carried on Indian Railways is done by Bombay. So that is the kind of importance that the railways have in Mumbai. Of course, the revenues that the railways gets from the transportation in Mumbai of passengers is comparatively less because it is a suburban traffic. We get about 1,500 crores per year. That was the figure last year, out of a total passenger revenue of 43,000 crores. 1,500 crores is what Bombay contributes from suburban traffic. And total, if we take the long-distance trains and the passenger trains, suburban passenger trains, it comes to around 5,000 crores. That's about 11% of the total passenger revenue. If you take the total revenue of the railways, the suburban traffic or this thing comes to a lesser figure. Passengers carried 822 crores or 8,227 million. The Bombay itself contributes on nearly 2,900 million of these passengers. On the freight front, we have really moved very fast over the last 8-10 years, and that has been the biggest challenge that Indian Railways has been facing as far as infrastructure capacity is concerned, because we have moved from, as I said, 500 million to around 1,100 million. So whatever we have grown from the time of independence till 2002, 2003, more than that we have grown in the last 10 years. And that has put an absolute strain on the system, and that is why the system requires investment. The railways today carry 70% of the coal, almost 81% of the fertilizer, 80% of the iron ore, 42% of the cement. So it is very, very closely linked with the economy of the country, and hence, in all these areas where there is movement and where there is a need to move more freight, there is need to invest money so that we can keep up with these percentages of freight that we carry. It was mentioned about meeting the passenger demand in full by way of quality of service, that is speed, comfort, cleanliness of trains, ticketing, and security. Similarly, the quality of service in freight, once again, speed, then the transit time, and the availability of rolling stock for the loaders. In fact, on each of these areas, the situation on major railroads in the world is different. If you take freight, in many countries, a lot of the rolling stock is privately owned. Similarly, they have what is called timetable freight trains, which probably will become a reality once dedicated freight corridor comes. This is another very important thing. The railways today, since we deal with the a large volume of staff. Actually, I think the figure is 52%. Staff with pensions, 52%. Fuel bill, 19%. IRFC payments, 5%. Stores, almost 86% is committed liabilities. So the railways have about 10% of its revenues only for further investment. Social service obligations, passenger and coaching service. This is one of the biggest area where there is, in some form, a subsidy or a cross-subsidization between passenger and freight. These figures have been assessed to be in the range of around 25 to 30,000 crores. Operation of a lot of branch lines and uneconomic lines, and these are not small in number. These are in the range of around 8 to 9,000 kilometers of meter gauge, narrow gauge, and other branch lines, which we are progressively converting into broad gauge. But this is one area which is a drain on the system, which we are not in a position to completely do away with or close it if we were a private system. The various concessions, the commodities carried below cost. These are the social service obligations. The cycle of investment or underinvestment. Underinvestment affects the quality of services and leads to delays. It makes it difficult to increase the fares because of the quality and the delays, which further leads to lower resource generation, lower surplus, and again leads to a cycle of lesser investment. From our own resources, the railways have been able to invest in the range of around 8 to 10,000 crores in the recent years. This figure needs to go up. Again, certain features which the Honorable Minister and the Chairman mentioned. 65% of the trains, our network is very peculiar compared to other railway systems. 65% of the network is used for passenger traffic and 35% is used for freight traffic. But the revenue is just the reverse. 65 is 30% revenue, and the remaining freight trains, which are occupying only 35% of the network, yield us the maximum revenue. We have congestion on high-density network, again related to the fact that we have grown almost exponentially over the last 10, 12 years, which has led to a lot of congestion on the high-density routes, which again affects the speed of trains. The budget which the Honorable Minister had laid in Parliament, it had 4 clear goals. One is that you deliver a sustained and measurable improvement in customer service, that is quality. Then safety. Third is investment in infrastructure. And fourth, to stabilize IR financially or make it financially sustainable. It should not happen that we borrow or spend so much more that we are not able to sustain. So that is again a very important goal. The drivers are have a medium level perspective. That is what has been done initial 5 years, 8.5 lakh crores investment. Building partnerships with the private sector. A lot of that has been done for rail connectivity projects. Similarly, with private sector rolling stock manufacturing units coming up. In future, with foreign direct investment which comes up, all that would be through a direct or indirect way partnership. Leveraging additional resources, leveraging the availability of the railway infrastructure and the equity in railway companies for leveraging additional resources, revamping the managing practices, systems and processes, and setting standards of governance and transparency. These are the 5 important drivers. The thrust areas, which the Minister outlined most of them, the quality of life in journeys, station development, capacity augmentation, very, very important, safety, technological upgradation, partnership for development so that investments and resources could come in, private sector skills could come in, improvement to management processes and systems, resource mobilization, I need not elaborate on that, the human resource improvements that are required, energy and sustainability, and most important of all, transparency and governance initiatives. This is the story of the growth in traffic revenues from 2008-9 till 15-16. The operating ratio has been hovering around 95, 94, and now it's around 91.8 last year. And the effort will be to improve the operating ratio. What is the investment focus of the railways? Though the minister mentioned that, let me very quickly go through. One is the high-density corridors prioritized based on revenue-generating capacity. To put it very in simple terms, one is developing capacity so that we are by way of doubling or tripling the congested routes so that we are able to carry more traffic. Another is related to that is the dedicated freight corridor, which again would create of over 500 billion net ton kilometers. Today, the Indian Railways transports around 700 billion net ton kilometers. These two corridors themselves will create a capacity of around over 500 billion NTKMs and would reduce the unit cost of transport, will enable the railways to move traffic, will enable the railways to decongest its trunk routes. Passenger amenity works, safety works. Yes. Yeah. The investment plan, which was mentioned, 8.5 lakh crores, I would like to highlight that almost half of it, 50% of it, is for network expansion, improvement of the network. The first, second, and the third items are directly adding capacity besides rolling stock, safety, and station development. But each one of these areas is important, and the first three areas are definitely very, very important because that is what would set the tempo as far as increasing the freight and passenger volumes are concerned. Joint venture with state governments, the minister mentioned. This is one thing which is absolutely the priority. Already joint venture agreements have been entered into with Odisha and Jharkhand and with Chhattisgarh for coal movement and for steel iron ore movement. This will be carried forward with JVs with other PSUs and with other state governments. IR to tie up long-term funds for projects. The minister mentioned about the LIC and about the World Bank, and we are trying to also leverage funding through World Bank for a significant amount, which will enable us to fund the projects. The areas of financing through PPP, stations, electrification and signaling works, construction of freight lines, elevated corridors, port and mine connectivity works through JVs and NGR model and annuity. This is one area where already a number of projects have been taken up and a number of projects have been commissioned. Overall, about 17 to 18,000 crore worth of last mile connectivity works are either commissioned or in progress. Non-tariff revenue is also another area which the railways is looking at. The chairman and minister both alluded to the issue of delegation of powers and the system of approvals. So this is one area which where change has been identified to be done and it is going on. The approval processes, delegation, then systems of maintenance of track, audit, and long-term PPAs for power procurement so that the power cost for the railways can be reduced. Then certain special projects of semi-high-speed trains, satellite terminals, satellite towns connectivity, dedicated freight corridor, in addition to the 2 dedicated freight corridors which are under commissioning, to have 1 or 2 more dedicated freight corridors which are required on the congested routes. We have a large number of projects, so project prioritization and with priority for high-density network, particularly doubling and third line projects. And in order that projects can take place quickly, the EPC form of contracting is also going to be adopted soon. In the budget implementation, broadly the 8.56 lakh crores which was mentioned, it would be seen that going by the current trends of gross budgetary support, around 2.5 lakh crores from gross budgetary support, 1 lakh from internal generation, and the rolling stock lease, the item number 5 of 1 lakh. These are areas which are already available within the railways, that is 2.5 plus 1 plus 1, that is almost 4.5. Institutional financing, LIC, then other debt and state joint ventures. These are the new areas which will be given priority so that these would be the sources of funding of the infrastructure for the railways. LIC, the loan agreement we effectuated in the current month, MOU, as you're already aware, has already been signed with LIC, Life Insurance Corporation of India. Projects worth 1 lakh crores expected to be executed through joint ventures with state government. As the minister mentioned, Maharashtra government has already committed a significant amount of 10,000 crores. Tax-free bonds is another option. Enhanced gross budgetary support, which has already happened in the current year and which will be pursued. Multilateral agencies like World Bank, ADB, and also bilateral agencies like JICA, we are pursuing so that a fund can be set up which would enable the railways to leverage pension funds or long tenor, low interest funds from abroad and within the country. So the multilateral and bilateral lending agencies have shown a lot of interest in this particular thing, and this process is currently very actively on. Implementation of projects through railways PSUs, which have already got strong financials. Most of them are debt-free and they have got reserves. Station development, CSR and MP-led funds for works like passenger amenities. Operating ratio 91.3 is an improvement over the budget target of 92.5. which is something which is significant, which has happened over the last few years. Then the minister mentioned about the quarterly results. I would like to specifically mention that the total revenues are up by 14.5% compared to 14-15 in the first quarter. The working expenses increase is 4.22%, which is lower than the increase expected of 7.68%. And the total capital expenditure also has increased, has gone up from a level which we had anticipated, almost 134% more than what we had targeted. Similarly, the actual performance in terms of commissioning also, there are many noteworthy mentions like new line, or more than 100 kilometers. Then a new port connectivity line was commissioned in Gandhidham to Tuna. Then the 23 kilometers part of the Lalitpur-Singrauli was commissioned, and another 122 kilometers gauge conversion and 150 kilometers doubling works and 151 kilometers electrification. I am mentioning these figures because they are significantly more than the figures which were there in the previous year, the same quarter. Structures and restructuring to facilitate investment, we are going to have a regulator, then the empowerment at the functional level, which was mentioned, creation of strategic business units and accounting reforms, the Kayakalp Council, state special purpose vehicle, and the strengthening in the Railway Ministry of the Financial Services Cell. The steps taken to improve project delivery, this main item of doubling on third line and gauge conversions, essentially about 7,000 kilometers of ongoing doubling third line works, 9,400 kilometers of new works, that is 16,400 kilometers of doubling and third line works, 4,000 kilometers of gauge conversion. This is the priority. This would, to a very significant extent, transform our capacity for the future, increase significantly the capacity for the future. Creation of new window for the funding of these projects, which I mentioned, 16,000 kilometers through institutional financing like the LIC or through other sources, and on a priority to finalize the DPRs of the works which are sanctioned so that the works could be started and finances could flow, then the implementation could start of these projects. Similarly, the appraisal and process through the Niti Aayog and Finance Ministry is also getting expedited, and there is a plan to involve the railway PSUs in execution of projects considering the number of projects. The targets for doubling gauge conversion to be implemented through railway PSUs for the next 4 to 5 years is also being set, as would be seen for new line 380, 500, 400 kilometers, and similarly for gauge conversion, and a very significant increase in doubling. That is what has been the theme so long, to increase the doubling and third line works. These are again some of the new things. There is a self-propelled wiring train which we are going to have, so that we will have 10,000 route kilometers of electrification in the next 5 years. Today the electrification is around 1,000 to 1,200 kilometers. So this is one of the very important targets which has been set for the railways, to increase the electrification, which would again help in carrying more freight and improving the speed of trains. This is a scheme which has been approved by the government, 400 stations to be developed to international standards, the land and space rights of the stations to be leveraged, and basically involving the private sector. Overall, the railways is targeting around 1 lakh crore of investment in the next 4 to 5 years through this route. These are just some visuals of the ongoing schemes at Anand Vihar. Then satellite terminals are planned in major cities, so that we will be able to decongest and also meet the need for additional traffic volumes. The dedicated freight corridor, the minister mentioned, these are the two most important projects for the eastern corridor and the western corridor, and are going to be commissioned in phases between 2017 and 2019. Till now, almost 30,000 crores worth of contracts have already been awarded for the two corridors. Besides, almost 7,000 to 8,000 crores of land acquisition expenditure has also been incurred. Almost 8,000 hectares of land has also been acquired. So it is really a mega project. And in the last 7-8 months, as mentioned, almost 18 to 19,000 crores of contracts have been awarded, so that and the works are all starting, and all the remaining contracts are expected to be awarded in the next 7 to 8 months. So this project is now on a very, very firm footing, and we expect that the entire funding of 82,000 crores is also tied up. This project should get commissioned in 2018-19. I already mentioned this. There was a mention made about the private participation. This is a summary of the entire picture. 9 projects have been commissioned so far involving the private sector, about 1,000 kilometers, where the railways have contributed about roughly a little more than 10%, 11% of the requirement. The rest has come through debt or equity. Similarly, other projects which are already approved or under various stages of progress, with about 6 to 7% of contribution from the railways, these projects will get implemented essentially through equity from other sources and debt. These are the list of the joint venture projects. Recently, the Jaigarh port is getting connected to the Konkan Railway network. Similarly, the Dighi port is also getting connected to the Indian Railway network at Roha. Then we have signed an MOU with the Steel Ministry for iron ore line on the Rawghat-Jagdalpur portion. Then similarly in Chhattisgarh, there are 2 mega projects where there will be almost 80 to 100 million tons of coal, and this would cost around 4,000 crores. Joint ventures have been set up by IRCON, which is a PSU of the Ministry of Railways, and this work of around 4 to 5,000 crores will be commissioned, will take place during the next 3 to 3.5 years. Similarly, we have signed a coal connectivity MOU with Odisha and Jharkhand, which will enable setting up of a special purpose vehicles with Coal India 64%, IRCON 26%, and the respective state governments 10%. These would take up projects worth 5 to 10,000 crores already, which are more or less identified. These are the main coal connectivity projects which are under implementation, which would lead to almost 60 plus 20 plus 35, 100 million tons in these three areas, Tori Shivpur, Shivpur Katotia and Jharsuguda area. The coal ministry has a very ambitious target of going up to 1 billion tons of coal production, and evacuation of coal will be a very critical factor. So these lines will be very critical for coal evacuation. Capacity augmentation has been referred to, mainly increasing the passenger carrying capacity and also the freight carrying capacity. This is one area in respect of passenger amenities which is being done, and we expect to commission a large number of coaches or all coaches with bio toilets by 2021-22. Make in India and foreign direct investment, the minister mentioned about 2-3 items. I have just listed these items. There is an electric locomotive factory which is coming up at Madhepura for state-of-the-art 12,000 horsepower locomotive, which for 800 locomotives. Similarly, for another factory of diesel locomotives at Marora, and another 200 locomotives which are being procured with the Japanese assistance. This is also coming up at Dankuni. So these are all state-of-the-art locomotives with the latest technology which would come in, which would again help the railways in moving more and more freight traffic. The train sets, the Honorable Minister already mentioned. This is also one of the areas where tendering has taken place. This is the visual of a train set. Essentially, the train set will enable about 20% saving in journey time on the same network because of much faster acceleration, deceleration. These are some visuals of renewable energy and LED lighting at Mumbai CST station. Less government and more governance is what is the thrust. These are certain important areas. One is creation of a logistics company by the railways called Transloc. This is again in a state of advanced processing. Similarly, the plan for modernization of production units, Dr. Saraswat is working on that. Then Mr. Som Mittal committee is working on an IT platform for bridging the gaps in IT and leveraging of IT. E-procurement and e-tendering is to be implemented in all forms of procurement. Then setting up of the infrastructure fund with World Bank assistance. This will be again, we hope it will be a huge fund which will which would again be a kind of a game changer. Then MOUs with the various sectors, power, energy conservation, renewable energy, and solar power plants. And lastly, last but not least, the regulator, who will be a regulator not only for tariff, but for various other areas in the railways. It will be with a regulator with overarching powers is what has been recommended, including a tariff regulator. The minister mentioned about the very quick implementation of the budget items. I will quickly cover these things. These are 79 items have been implemented. There is a very close monitoring. Quality of life in journeys, the ticketing, this is one area. Then escalators at stations. Here again, there is a plan for 400 escalators and lifts. Mechanized laundries so that better linen is available for the passengers. Then helplines, new non-AC coaches, and various other initiatives which were announced in the budget and promptly implemented. This is again Kayakalp Council, the minister mentioned. Then the MOU for a railway research center, construction of toilets, then bio-toilets and the station development. Wi-Fi is another area which is being pursued. SPV, the minister repeatedly mentioned about the in-principle approval being given by the states. This is so that the states would be a close partner of the railways and would contribute beside in land and in other ways for project implementation. MOU has already been signed with Ministry of Steel, actually. It is Ministry of Steel for Rowghat, Jagdalpur, and Ministry of Coal and Government of Orissa, and Ministry of Coal and Government of Jharkhand. This has been signed. The private freight terminal policy of the railways has been reviewed, and a lot of concessions have been made and the policy improved. During the fortnight from May 26 to June 9, the Rail Yatri Pakhwada, Upbhokta Pakhwada was also conducted, in which there was a huge outreach program, and on the zonal railways, on the divisions from the Railway Board, a lot of activities were taken up. These are the details of that. Passenger interactions, cleanliness, sanitation drives, ticket checking drives, punctuality drives, and very favorable tweets were received by the Honorable Minister. Finally, these are the potential areas for investment which are identified also through the foreign direct investment route. Suburban corridors through PPP. We were hoping that the elevated corridor in Mumbai would be one such project. In fact, there's a lot of interest shown in the project by various private developers. The high-speed train project is another area where it would definitely need foreign investment and foreign funding because they are huge infrastructure projects with which require a very large amount of capital. The Mumbai-Ahmedabad corridor itself is around 98,000 crores. So there will be a lot of money required for high speed, not only in Mumbai-Ahmedabad, but in other corridors as well. Rolling stock manufacturing, I already mentioned, electrification and signaling systems, freight terminals, logistics parks, and passenger terminals. These are the areas of investment in future, because these are areas where they have by and large been entirely government investment. This would change, this could change, this would change, and this can change. These are the projects where in principle approval have been given under the participatory policy. Essentially, all of them are port connectivity projects. So these are in a what we call an NGR model, is a private line model, where the private sector is allowed to own the land, they construct the line, and in perpetuity, the line remains with them, and the revenues, which are the apportioned revenues of the line, they also remain with them. I must mention that wherever we have invested in rail connectivity works, it has been a big success as far as revenues to the developer or the private participant is concerned. So as an investment option, it has been a very good area, whether it is Pipavav Port Connectivity, Kutch Rail Corporation, Bharuch Dahej Rail Corporation, Krishnapatnam Port, or the other lines which are going to come up in future. All of them have tremendous traffic potential, and those which have already been commissioned are already doing extremely well as far as traffic volumes are concerned, as far as revenues are concerned. Finally, the expected outcomes in the next 4-5 years, 3 to 4 years, what are the expected outcomes? One is that we hope that we will be in a position, we would construct 1,700 kilometers of new line and 8,100 kilometers of doubling in the next 3 years. This is the target. 3 stations to be completely redeveloped to international standards. Train sets, 10 train sets would be operationalized. By 2019, the 2 dedicated freight corridors would be commissioned, the eastern and western, and would generate a huge capacity of all over 500 billion net ton kilometers, which is almost 80% of what is being transported in the country today. That much of capacity would get created. Production of state-of-the-art locomotives, I mentioned Madhepura, Marora, then the 9,000 horsepower locomotives which are coming through for the freight corridor. 10,000 kilometers of electrification. So then elimination of 5,000 unmanned level crossings. Internet ticket penetration, already it is one of the success stories of the railways. This will be increased further. Paperless ticketing in suburban sections. This will be another thing which would be pursued with energy. 1,000 megawatt of solar power generation. This is one area which is identified for the future. I mean, not only from the railways, but also in the country to have more solar power. And this is one, and the railways have the advantage that it has got a lot of land alongside the tracks and also land and area at the stations. Thank you.